Let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're diving into a sweeping geopolitical epic from ancient Manchuria. We are talking about a time when a massive empire falls and a legendary hero is somehow forged from the absolute darkest of ashes. It's a story that blends intense political maneuvering, brutal betrayal, and, honestly, one of the most unexpected character transformations in all of history.
It's a pretty wild question when you think about it, right? How exactly does the most cowardly, pampered prince in ancient Manchuria eventually become its greatest legendary rebel? To really understand this incredible transformation, we have to look past the fancy silk robes and the palace walls. We need to examine a desperate power struggle that shaped this guy's world long before he was even born. The stage was set by forces way larger than just one royal family. To get a sense of the sheer scale of the geopolitical stakes here, let's look at the timeline. Everything kicks off in 108 BC, when the great ancient Korean kingdom of Goguryeo completely collapses. And it doesn't just fall, it is crushed under the brutal iron weapon military occupation of the Chinese Han dynasty, who established these 4 commanderies to rule the whole region. Out of that terrible oppression, we see the rise of a resistance force from 107 to 89 BC, known as the Damul Army. And that ultimately leads us, 20 years later, right to the adulthood of our main subject, Prince Jumong.
So, moving into Part 1, the geopolitical ashes and the predecessor's tragedy.
Amidst all the absolute devastation of that Goguryeo collapse we just talked about, the surviving tribes and states are terrified. The Kingdom of Buyeo, in particular, is forced into this highly dangerous balancing act. On the surface, they're actively appeasing the Han Empire just to avoid being wiped off the map. But in the shadows, they are secretly harboring hunted Goguryeo refugees who are being actively chased and enslaved by Han cavalry. It is a total powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark is Haemosu. He's this incredibly charismatic leader and an absolute master archer who steps right into the power vacuum. He forms the Damul Army, which is a guerrilla resistance force dedicated to rescuing those displaced refugees and pushing the Han out of their ancestral lands. And he doesn't do this alone. He fights side by side with his blood brother, Prince Jumong of Buyeo, creating a really powerful alliance against their occupiers. But here's the harsh reality. Heroism doesn't always win out in politics. Despite all his bravery and his military success, Haemosu eventually becomes a massive political liability for Buyeo. The Buyeo court is just completely terrified of retaliation from the Han Empire. So what do? They set a trap. Haemosu is ambushed by his own allies, violently blinded, and falls into a river. Everyone just presumes he's dead. In a single, brutal political maneuver, the entire resistance is basically decapitated. You can imagine the guilt Prince Jumong, Haemosu's blood brother, is feeling over this betrayal. To try and make amends, he secretly takes in Lady Yuhua, the woman Haemosu loved, and it turns out she is pregnant with Haemosu's unborn son. Jumong steps up, taking the boy, Jumong, and raising him as his own royal prince within the Buyeo palace. He keeps the kid's true lineage a heavily guarded secret, specifically to protect him from the Han Empire and from rival politicians who would definitely want Haemosu's bloodline extinguished.
Which brings us to Part 2, the spoiled prince and a nest of vipers.
Fast forward 20 years. Jumong is now the king of Buyeo, ruling over a palace that is essentially a political snake pit. And unfortunately, the legendary Haemosu's hidden son has grown up to be a huge disappointment. The dynamics in the royal family are incredibly lopsided. On one hand, you have Prince Jumong, who is cowardly, physically weak, totally lacks discipline, and vastly prefers drinking and chasing women over, studying statecraft or martial arts. On the other hand, you have his older stepbrothers, Prince Daiso and Prince Yongpo. These guys are ruthless, highly skilled, politically cunning, and endlessly arrogant. They constantly bully Jumong, completely outmatching him in literally every conceivable way.
So, knowing all that, you really have to wonder what could possibly force someone so thoroughly comfortable and so totally disconnected from his legacy to finally wake up. What actually breaks a spoiled prince who has never had to fight for anything in his entire life? Well, the breaking point finally arrives, and it comes from a disastrous, unforgivable mistake. Jumong accidentally destroys a sacred Buyeo artifact. For King Jumong, this is the absolute last straw. Jumong is officially exiled. Just like that, he is stripped of all his royal titles, his expensive silk robes, his personal guards, the whole shebang. In the blink of an eye, the pampered prince is thrown out of the palace and onto the unforgiving, dangerous streets to fend for himself.
Let's dive into Part 3,
the underworld mentor, and the cave prison.
Stripped of his royal protection, Jumong immediately finds himself being hunted by assassins sent by his ruthless stepbrothers. Fleeing for his life, his descent takes him down into a hidden, subterranean prison, a genuinely dark place that is about to change the trajectory of history. Now, the dramatic irony here is incredible. In this dark cave, Jumong discovers an elderly, blind prisoner with long, unkempt hair. We, as the audience, know that this broken old prisoner is actually the legendary hero Mo-su. He didn't die decades ago. He was secretly locked away by Buyeo politicians to maintain their fragile peace with the Han. But here's the crazy part. Neither the blind master nor the exiled prince knows their true connection. They have absolutely no idea they are biological father and son.
Despite not knowing the boy's identity, Mo-su sees some kind of hidden potential in this broken, exiled young man. He takes Jumong under his wing and kicks off a brutal training regimen. Step 1 is all about shedding his deep-seated cowardice through intense physical endurance. Step 2 is mastering internal martial arts, literally learning to channel his chi or internal energy. And Step 3, this is the legendary part, teaching him the art of firing arrows blindfolded, relying entirely on sound and instinct. Through this father-son bond, Jumong's imposter syndrome is completely stripped away, forging him into a highly disciplined warrior.
All right, moving to part 4, Blood, Betrayal, and Rebirth, and the Catalyst.
Of course, peace never lasts in this world. Just as Jumong finally begins to come into his own, learning discipline and embracing the heavy burden of leadership, his stepbrothers track him down. And it gets worse. Prince Buyeo and young Po discover the blind master's true identity, and they immediately recognize the massive threat Mo-su poses to Buyeo's fragile alliance with the Han Empire. What follows is a heartbreaking climax. Buyeo and young Po lead a heavily armed assassination squad into the prison. They mercilessly attack and kill the blind master. And the absolute cruelest part of it all, Jumong is forced to stand there and watch helplessly as his stepbrothers violently execute the very mentor who had just saved his life and taught him how to be a man.
Following this traumatic murder, Jumong manages to survive and sneak a meeting with his mother, Lady Yuhua. It is then that she drops a devastating revelation, telling him, "The blind master was your father." I mean, in an instant, Jumong's entire reality is shattered. He realizes the man he grew to love and watch die wasn't just a mentor. It was his own flesh and blood. Suddenly, this massive geopolitical struggle of his people becomes deeply, unavoidably personal.
That single moment changes everything. The era of weakness, it's over. The cowardly prince basically dies in that cave with Mo-su, and the rebel leader is born, armed with his father's unparalleled archery skills and a burning, singular desire for justice. Jumong makes a strategic decision. He returns to the Buyeo palace, but he completely masks his new strength. He goes right back to playing the fool, letting his stepbrothers think he is still weak, all while secretly plotting his revenge in the shadows.
So why does this history matter for us today? What should you actually take away from this? Honestly, it's because it is a profoundly universal story. It's about the incredibly difficult, painful process of shedding our deepest personal flaws so we can take on a massive burden for the greater good. Jumong realizes he has to live up to this forgotten legacy. He commits to taking up his father's mantle, fighting for the oppressed refugees, and quietly, methodically rebuilding the Damal army from the inside out.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to really consider the sheer willpower and mental discipline required for Jumong's next steps. Just imagine having to smile at the men who murdered your father, pretending to be a harmless, pathetic coward every single day, while secretly preparing to tear their entire empire to the ground. If you had to play the fool to avenge your legacy and save an entire people, honestly, how long could you wear the mask?